"Christmas. Mom. Please." That's all my daughter said. No explanation. No context. No tears. Just fear. For years, she avoided looking me in the eye. For years, she believed I was the problem. And I believed it too. But that Christmas, I decided to break the silence. I put in her hair what she feared the most. I went downstairs, and when she saw me, fainted in front of everyone. The room fell silent. Her father froze. And it was there, at that moment, that the truth he hid for 20 years came to light, like an avalanche. This is the story of a lie told with such care that destroyed the bond between mother and daughter for 2 decades. It is the story of a father who manipulated with affection and of a daughter who grew up afraid of her own mother. But most of all, it is the story of a woman who chose not to be silent anymore, even though she knew that doing so would destroy the image of an entire family. If you've ever been silenced, if you've ever felt like your version of the facts has been buried, or if you know what it's like to love someone who has learned to hate you, so you need to listen to this story until the end. Because what happened after that fainting? Everything changed. It was Christmas Eve in Portland, Oregon, and the city looked like something out of an old postcard. The snow fell slowly, as if respecting the silence of that long-awaited night. The lights of the houses twinkled with a warm glow that contrasted with the biting cold outside. There was a tranquility in the air that only Christmas brings, as if time slowed down to allow old memories to return with more force. The decorated windows, the illuminated pine trees, the smell of freshly baked cookies. Everything seemed to conspire for a perfect holiday. But inside one house in particular, something hung in the air, something that even the twinkling lights couldn't dispel. And it was in this house that Margaret Collins lived, a 50-year-old woman who had already lived many Christmases, but none like that. Margaret always thought that Christmas was sacred, not just because of the traditions, but because it was the only time of year when she felt like the world stopped long enough to listen. When she was young, she prepared everything weeks in advance, from the tree with ornaments inherited from her grandmother to the recipes she learned from her mother. Every detail was treated as a ritual of love. And even after the divorce, even in the loneliest years, she kept the Christmas flame alive. She did it for her daughter, Emily, but also for herself, as a reminder that, despite everything, there was still beauty, there was still hope. But that year, something had changed, and she felt it since the first day of December. That morning, however, started no different. Margaret woke up early, as she always did on feast days. He prepared coffee, arranged the bows of those present, and reviewed the guest list. Everything was under control, until the phone rang. It was Emily. The daughter's voice came dry, almost cold. "Mom, please don't wear that at Christmas." That was all he said. Margaret was silent for a few seconds, trying to understand. "That what, honey?" But Emily just repeated, now with more emphasis, "Don't use it, okay? Promise." And hung up before her mother could ask any more. That call would echo in Margaret's mind all day, and she had no idea how much it would change everything. 4 hours, Margaret tried to decipher the message. He mentally went over every detail of what he had prepared. The new dress, mother's necklace, the old brooches. Nothing seemed to justify such a harsh reaction. Emily had always been intense, but it bordered on the inexplicable. Margaret's heart was beating fast, as if anticipating that there was something bigger hidden in that simple sentence. And it was at that moment that she felt, this Christmas would not be like the others. There was something lurking, something that would only reveal itself with time. But still, she decided to go ahead with the plans. After all, why should a mother be afraid of Christmas itself? That night, Portland seemed even quieter. The city slept under a white cloak, while the houses were filled with voices and laughter. Except for Margaret's. There, the sound was different. A silence full of thoughts, of memories that insisted on coming to the surface. She walked from room to room, arranging the candles, checking the lights, but her mind was elsewhere. That strange request from Emily seemed more serious with each passing hour. Don't use that. What kind of memory, what kind of pain could be associated with an object to the point of causing so much panic? Outside, children were playing in the snow. Inside, Margaret opened the drawer where she kept old memories. Yellowed photos, cards with calligraphy from Emily's childhood, small relics of a life already lived. And there, deep down, he was. Such an object. The play that his daughter didn't want to see. As she touched it, Margaret felt a chill. Not out of fear, but out of instinct. That carried more than material. It carried history. And perhaps, too, secrets that she herself did not know existed. She held him for a moment, staring as if searching for answers no one had ever given her. But as much as her instinct urged her to be cautious, something inside her said that this was the time. That the truth, as painful as it was, needed to be faced. She didn't know what would happen yet, but she felt she couldn't ignore that call anymore. And then, carefully, he placed the object on top of the dresser, where he could see it throughout the day. If this carries that much weight, then I need to know why, he muttered. And that's how the last day before the party began, with a silent promise. She wouldn't run away from it anymore. What Margaret didn't yet know, and the public would soon realize, was that her daughter's simple request hid a tangle of memories, lies, and unresolved pain. The "don't use" was more than a warning. It was the cry of a scarred childhood, of a forgotten truth, of a cruel manipulation that had hovered for decades. And that Christmas, everything would come to light. But before the truth was revealed, it would be necessary to revive open wounds, confront ghosts, and, above all, face the past with courage. Because sometimes, healing starts with the simplest act, not ignoring what hurts us. Margaret Collins was the kind of woman that many saw as strong, but few knew the cracks hidden under the armor. He lived in a simple but cozy house on West Portland, a leafy neighborhood where the red leaves of autumn still insisted on peeking between the snowflakes. She had worked for years as a librarian at a local school, a place where she felt useful, even without being noticed. There was something about his posture that mixed elegance with caution, as if she had learned, throughout her life, that living was a constant act of protecting herself. And maybe it was, because behind the polite smile and calm eyes, there was a woman who carried much more than she appeared. At 50, Margaret didn't feel old, but she didn't feel light either. Tired, perhaps, of silent emotional battles, of nights when I cried alone without knowing if I was still loved by someone. The divorce with Richard was not just the end of a marriage, it was the break with a part of her that believed in love as a foundation. They had married young, idealistic, in love, but passion gave way to control, and control to fear. Margaret spent years trying to keep up appearances, believing that one day everything would get better. But it never got better. And when she finally had the courage to leave, it was too late. The scars were already on her skin, and even more, in the soul. Emily, her only child, was everything to her. But their relationship has always been complicated. As a child, Emily was sweet, curious, clinging to her mother. But as he grew up, something changed. It became more distant, more critical, as if Margaret carried some guilt that was never named. After the divorce, the distance increased. The teenager began to spend more time with her father, and Margaret, not understanding why, was pushed aside. He tried everything: gifts, conversations, handwritten letters, but it seemed that nothing could break that invisible wall. It was as if, at some point in history, she had lost the right to be heard. And that, for a mother, is like losing your breath. Richard Davis, her ex-husband, was the typical man who knew how to manipulate words. Successful in business, eloquent, always with the right answer on the tip of his tongue. But behind the charming facade, there was coldness. Margaret gradually realized this, how he controlled his decisions, diminished his opinions, put doubts in his mind. She began to doubt herself, her sanity, until one day, in an explosion of lucidity, she decided to leave. But Richard never accepted the loss of control. And little by little, he got closer to Emily, molding her with phrases spoken with false tenderness, rewriting history in his favor. And Margaret, outside, watched everything without being able to intervene. Grace Miller, Margaret's best friend, was her lifeline through the storm. A neighbor since college, she knew her story like no one else. She was the kind of friend who told truths when no one else had the courage. "You're stronger than you think, Margaret," he always said. And she was the one who wiped the tears, who remembered the value that her friend had even when the world seemed blind. Grace knew about the traumas, the fears, the sleepless nights. He also knew the guilt Margaret carried, a nameless guilt fueled by years of silence between mother and daughter. But he never let her forget. There was still time to rebuild. Even if it was difficult, even if it hurt. Over time, Margaret learned to walk on her own 2 feet. She rebuilt a routine, relearned how to cook for one, went back to listening to her favorite songs. But the emptiness that Emily left still hurt. Every unanswered message, every Christmas without a connection, every birthday ignored was like a small stab. And yet, Margaret never gave up. Each December, she set up the tree with the same delicacy, left a gift with her daughter's name in the corner of the fireplace, and waited. Because, deep down, he still believed that one day Emily would come back. That the truth would somehow find its way to them. And maybe, just maybe, that Christmas was the time. Despite the pain, Margaret never became bitter. There was a silent sweetness in her, as one who chose tenderness even though she had every reason to harden. She smiled at strangers on the street, tipped generously in the cafe, remembered the name of every student in the library. Small gestures that no one noticed, but that for her were ways of resisting, of not becoming like those who hurt her. And that was his secret strength. Because while Richard used the power of speech to manipulate, Margaret used the power of silence to heal. It was the difference between mastering and understanding. And that difference, one day, would make all the difference. But now, with Christmas just around the corner and her daughter's strange request still echoing, Margaret wondered. What, after all, was there between them that had not yet been said? Could all that coldness come from something deeper? Something planted by Richard, perhaps? Or something that she herself unwittingly let grow? The questions swirled in his mind like flakes in the wind. And the only certainty she had was this. She was tired of running away. If there was something hidden in the past, I was willing to find out. Because sometimes, to save a bond, you need to have the courage to bleed. And Margaret, for the first time in years, felt that courage had finally returned. The morning of Christmas Eve dawned gray, as if even the Portland sky knew something was about to happen. Margaret got up earlier than usual, not out of necessity, but out of restlessness. He drank his coffee in silence, staring out the window as the snow fell with mesmerizing delicacy. It was the day of the feast. Everything was prepared. The food was already advanced. The lights flashed synchronized, the decorations perfectly positioned. But there was something that kept from his mind, that enigmatic call from Emily. "Don't wear that at Christmas." The phrase echoed inside her like a distant drum. And now, more than ever, she needed to understand. Moved by an impulse that even she did not understand, Margaret climbed up to the attic. It was there that he kept the boxes with old items, family heirlooms, memories of times that seemed like other centuries. The air was cold, suffused with the smell of wood and memories. Rummaging through fabrics, albums, and labeled boxes, she found the object. an old, golden hair clip ornamented with a red stone in the center. It looked like a period jewel, delicate and at the same time imposing. Margaret picked him up carefully, as if holding a secret. That was just an accessory, but for some reason it carried a heavy energy. And it was precisely this clip that Emily had asked not to use. Margaret's mind began to sift through forgotten memories. She remembered wearing that clip on several old Christmases, especially in the days when she was still married to Richard. It was an item she liked, inherited from her maternal grandmother, and she used to wear whenever she wanted to feel special. It was not financially valuable, but it had enormous emotional value. Whenever she put on that piece, she felt more confident, more herself. And maybe that's why Richard hated her. There was something about that discreet glow that bothered him. And Margaret, little by little, realized how he criticized her every time she used it. But he never understood the reason. Hitherto, with the barrette in her hands, Margaret slowly descended, feeling a mixture of nostalgia and anguish. What, after all, was it about that object that caused so much discomfort? When she returned to the room, Grace was already there, helping with the preparations. Seeing her, Margaret casually commented on the barrette, perhaps expecting a different reaction. But her friend froze for a second. "Are you going to wear this today?" he asked with an arched eyebrow. Margaret nodded, and Grace looked away. He didn't comment on anything else, but that silence said it all. There was something behind that piece. Something that everyone seemed to know, except her. Later, as she finished getting ready, Margaret received another call from Emily. This time, her daughter's voice trembled. "Mom, I'm serious. Don't use it, please. For all that is most sacred. Don't use that." Margaret tried to calm her down, saying that it was just an ornament, an old memory, that there was no point in such a fuss. But Emily wouldn't listen. He hung up crying. That was like a snap inside Margaret. The fear in her daughter's voice was not common. It was visceral. It seemed like she wasn't just making a wish. She was begging. And that made her mother's heart tighten. But along with the fear came something Margaret didn't expect: anger. Not from her daughter, but from the feeling of living for years in silence, walking on eggshells, not understanding why so many things between them never fit. It was as if the barrette symbolized everything Margaret had always had to hide in order to be accepted. And in that moment, she realized that maybe it was time to stop hiding. Perhaps that Christmas was finally the time to allow herself to be seen, in its entirety, with all that implies. With a past, memories, and even with a simple hair clip. As the clock approached the time of the party, Margaret placed the clip over the dressing table. She had not yet decided whether to use it, but something inside her said that it wasn't just a matter of accessory. It was a symbolic decision. It was about keeping quiet or taking a stand. And the most curious thing was that she didn't even know exactly what against. "I only knew that I was tired of obeying rules that I didn't understand." That object, in some way, represented his identity, his history, his pains, and his courage to resist. And this Christmas, everything seemed to point to an inevitable reunion with what had been buried. And it was then that something unexpected happened. Grace, sitting on the sofa in the living room, looked at Margaret with teary eyes and said, "You don't remember, do you? From the day everything changed." Margaret stopped. His breath failed for a second. "What day, Grace?" she asked, but her friend just looked away, as if she had said more than she should. A chill ran down Margaret's spine. The night was just beginning, and the truth, it seemed closer than ever. The attic of a house does not only store boxes and old objects. He also archives silences. And that night, as the preparations for the party continued at a Christmas pace, it was in the attic of memory that Margaret found herself. Sitting in the armchair in the living room, with the clip still closed in her hands, She tried to sew loose memories. The distant look, almost lost, betrayed that his mind was far from there, returning to a time when life was different. A time when love had another name. And so is fear. Because there was something about that object, something she couldn't fully access, but that gave her goosebumps. And like all old trauma, it does not disappear. He just hides until someone calls him by name. It was 1999. Margaret was still married to Richard. Emily was only 6 years old. It was a cold night, very similar to that one. And she remembered getting ready for a Christmas dinner organized by her husband's partners. She wanted to look beautiful, to feel alive, despite already carrying in that thin body the signs of a woman who learned, day after day, to erase herself. She remembered choosing a burgundy dress and putting her grandmother's barrette in her hair. She always made her feel more confident, more herself. But it was enough for Richard to see her with the accessory for the tone of the night to change. "Take it off," he said dryly. "You look like an old woman trying to get attention." Margaret smiled uncomfortably, trying to ignore it. But inside, something broke. It was not the first time he had diminished her, but that one, in particular, hurt more. Because it was in front of her daughter. Emily, sitting on the couch, watched it all. He said nothing, after all, he was just a child, but his eyes absorbed every word, every gesture. At the party, Richard acted normally, as if nothing had happened. But Margaret carried the shame all night. She felt out of place, invisible, out of her own body. And after that, he never wore the clip in public again. Not for fear of the accessory, but for fear of the memory it activated. He buried the piece along with his self-esteem. And over time, he also buried the memory of that day. Or at least he tried. Now, decades later, she realized that perhaps Emily had not forgotten. Maybe that night, for her daughter, was the first time something broke inside her too. Children do not understand emotional dynamics, but they do. And Emily felt it. He saw his mother being humiliated. She saw her father devalue someone she loved. And as he grew up under that shadow, he perhaps began to absorb a distorted narrative. Perhaps he learned that something was wrong with his mother, that she was fragile, or unstable, or even dangerous. All of this subtly planted by loose words, dry gestures, cold looks. And now, it made sense. Emily's fear wasn't of the clip itself. It was from memory that she activated. But what Margaret still couldn't understand was why she was so desperate now. Why such a vehement request? Why did a simple object arouse such urgency? It was at this moment that Grace, sitting on the floor in front of the fireplace, decided to speak. "I remember that night. I was there, remember? I went to pick you up at the end of the party. You called me crying." He said he wanted to leave, that he couldn't take it anymore. But when I arrived, Richard pretended everything was fine. "And you?" He was silent. Margaret was paralyzed. The memory came back with more force. Yes, she had called. And yes, she had chosen silence. Not out of cowardice, but out of survival instinct. And that, it marked her deeply. She wondered then if that episode had really been buried, or if it had just been locked in an emotional basement, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Because the past does not disappear. It settles in the dark corners of the mind and heart. And it comes back, it always comes back. Sometimes in the sound of a song, others in the smell of a place. And, in that case, in the simple act of opening a box and finding a hair clip. An apparently harmless accessory, but which now represented much more. A symbol of repressed pain, of cultivated silences, of lies masquerading as normality. And the cruelest, of a childhood marked by distorted visions. With all of this swirling inside her, Margaret began to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. Anger. Not a destructive anger, but a lucid anger. One of those that are born when we understand that we have been wronged for a long time. It was as if something was being released inside her. As if, finally, she was ready to say, enough. And maybe that's what that night represented. Not just a party, but a rite of passage. A reunion with his own voice. And if Emily was still stuck in the past, perhaps the only way to free her was precisely to show that her mother was not a victim, but a whole woman who survived. At that moment, Margaret decided. He looked at the clip with new eyes. No longer as a painful memory, but as a piece of the puzzle that needed to be fitted together. And for the first time in years, she understood. Maybe that piece was the key to opening the door that kept her daughter apart. Because healing doesn't just come with time. It comes with courage, with a conscious choice to face what bleeds. And on that Christmas Eve, Margaret was ready for it. Ready to let the past speak. Ready to listen to what she herself avoided for so long. As the snow continued to fall gently over Portland, inside Margaret's house, time seemed to run at another speed. Every minute, the atmosphere changed subtly. There was laughter in the audios of neighbors playing Christmas songs, flashing lights on balconies, excited children passing by with red hats. But none of it reached the inside of the Collins house. There, the Christmas decoration contrasted with a dense, almost electric energy. Margaret continued to set the table, arranging the dishes, checking the lighting of the candles, but the movements were automatic. Her mind was far away, in a loop between memories, hypotheses, and omens. With each new ring of the phone, her heart raced. It wasn't anxiety for the event. It was something else. As if a part of his body knew that, in a few hours, something profound would be revealed. Grace could see her friend's restlessness. Even trying to keep the atmosphere light, with background music and subtle jokes, he couldn't disguise his own tension. The two exchanged silent glances between one platter and the other, as if each movement carried an unanswered question. "Are you going to wear it?" whispered Grace, referring to the barrette. Margaret hesitated. "I need to." The answer was short, firm, almost like an act of faith. And it was at that moment that something changed inside her. It was no longer a doubt. It was a decision. The clock was 4 p.m. when Emily's second call arrived. It was more intense, more urgent. The daughter's voice was desperate. "Mom, I'm begging. Do not use it. Please, please, listen to me just this once." Margaret tried to calm her down, saying that everything was fine, that it was no big deal. But Emily screamed. He simply screamed. "You don't understand. It destroys me." And he hung up. Margaret was paralyzed with her cell phone in her hand. He looked at Grace, his eyes moist, but said nothing. For the first time, she had the clear feeling that her daughter knew something she herself had blocked. And Emily's fear. Now it seemed much more like trauma than whimsy. With the arrival of night approaching, the preparations gained intensity. Margaret went to her room and began to get ready. She chose a simple, dark blue dress made of light fabric. He wanted something discreet, but that reflected dignity. And then, with trembling hands, he took the clip and placed it in his hair, as he did in the old days. He looked at himself in the mirror for long minutes. The reflection was of a woman who had suffered a lot, but who was finally beginning to recognize herself. For the first time in years, she felt she no longer needed to justify herself. That night would be yours. The house was beautiful. The outside lights were on, the tree twinkled in the corner of the room, the smells of cinnamon, apples, and roast turkey scented the air. Grace was in the kitchen, finishing assembling the last entrees, and the first guests began to arrive. Smiling neighbors, old acquaintances, distant uncles. Gradually, the house was filled with voices and clicks of glasses, but the energy between Margaret and the environment seemed disconnected. She smiled, greeted, but her gaze was often lost in the door. He was waiting for Emily, and at the same time, he didn't know if he wanted her to see what he had decided to wear. It was as if both were about to cross a line that allowed no return. Around 7 p.m., the doorbell rang again. It was Richard. Without warning, no invitation. He wore an elegant coat, a serene, almost cynical expression. Margaret froze for a moment. Grace immediately approached her friend, as if protecting without asking. "Good evening," Richard said, as if the past had been erased with a simple smile. Everyone in the room noticed the mood change. It was as if the room suddenly cooled down, despite the heater on. Richard walked among the guests naturally, as if he were still the owner of the house. But his eyes, they were looking for something. They were looking for someone. Emily arrived a few minutes later, alone. She was pale. As soon as he saw his father, he hesitated. But when she saw her mother, with the barrette in her hair, her eyes widened. The panic was evident. He said nothing. He just lowered his gaze and walked inside, as if trying to protect himself from something invisible. That left Margaret devastated inside, but she remained steadfast. I knew something was being stirred there. Something that, in one way or another, needed to come to light. And even without understanding everything, she trusted that the truth was the only way to healing. Even though the healing sometimes began with pain, the environment remained in a fragile balance. Pleasant conversations, shy laughter, low music. But anyone who was attentive would notice that there was tension in the air. An invisible thread that connected every look between Margaret, Richard, and Emily. A thread that seemed about to break. And through it all, Margaret moved calmly. He served drinks, listened to the guests, smiled. But in his eyes there was something else. Something that said, "The time is coming." And it was. Because some truths are not hidden forever. And that night, under the snow, under the blinkers, under the cloths of memory, the truth was about to be revealed. Night had fallen over Portland with a deceptive serenity. The snow continued to fall, covering the streets with a thick layer of white that drowned out the sounds and slowed everything down, quieter, as if the world was holding its breath. But inside the Collins home, the silence gave way to growing unease. Supper was served, candles lit, wine circulating among the guests. Laughter and greetings filled the room with the illusion of harmony. But anyone who really paid attention would notice there was something out of place. A more tense look here, a longer silence there, an absence of spontaneity in the gestures. It was the kind of discomfort that you can't see with your eyes, but it is felt in the skin. The house was full. Longtime friends, some distant relatives, neighborhood neighbors, and Emily's colleagues. Everyone was there, dressed in elegant clothes, admiring the meticulous decoration. The decorations hanging from the stairwell railing, the fireplace burning, the Christmas dishes well served, everything seemed perfect. But perfection was only a thin varnish on unstable ground. Richard circulated among the guests as if he were an essential part of the party. He spoke charmingly, made witty comments, laughed out loud. But his watchful eyes were constantly searching for Emily, and especially they watched Margaret with an intensity that mixed criticism and fear. It was as if he was waiting, the moment when everything would get out of control. Emily, in turn, maintained a reclusive posture. He didn't talk much. Her eyes avoided direct contact with her mother. She sat by the fireplace, talking to a friend, but she didn't really give in to the conversation. She looked restless, like someone about to flee, not physically, but emotionally. When he looked at Margaret, he quickly turned away. And the reason was obvious. The barrette. The mere presence of that object in her mother's hair seemed to be a powerful trigger, a symbolic presence that crushed the air between the two of them. It was as if that peace spoke for itself, as if he was shouting everything that had not yet been said. Margaret, for her part, maintained a serene presence. He walked calmly, served the guests, smiled politely, but his eyes did not rest. She observed everything. She was attentive to Emily's gestures, to Richard's controlled behavior, to Grace's reactions, who was also restless. It was as if everyone knew something was about to happen, but no one knew exactly what or when. Margaret, however, was no longer afraid. She felt within her a new strength, a silent certainty that, whatever the outcome of that night, she would not run away. I was ready. The environment seemed increasingly charged. The conversation of the guests became more spaced, as if the smiles were masked. One or the other noticed the strange atmosphere between the family members and exchanged discreet glances, trying to understand what was happening. Some were suspicious of a possible disagreement, others simply pretended not to notice. But the truth was that everyone, even without understanding, felt the same shiver. There was something very unresolved there. And when the past hovers around the present with enough force, even those that have nothing to do with history are struck by the shadow. Grace approached Margaret discreetly. "Do you still want to get on with this?" he whispered. The answer came firmly, "Now more than ever." Her friend nodded silently. It was no longer time to hesitate. Margaret knew that by wearing that beret, she didn't just stir up a memory. She confronted an entire structure of manipulation and silence. It was more than an aesthetic gesture. It was an emotional manifesto, a rescue. And even if no one there understood at the time, she needed to do it for herself. Because certain truths only take shape when they are exposed, even if they hurt. The clock struck 8 p.m. Everyone was accommodated in the room, waiting for the traditional toast. Margaret knew that this would be the moment. It was time to go downstairs. Upstairs, in the bedroom, she had prepared herself carefully. The blue dress, the subtle makeup, the perfume that Emily always said reminded her of her childhood, all chosen with intention. And now, downstairs, the voices of the guests mingled with the soft sound of the piano playing a Christmas carol. No one knew, but the next image would change everything. Because what was about to happen wasn't just the climax of one night. It was the burst of a truth kept for years. And as everyone laughed and helped themselves to dessert, the sound of Margaret's footsteps began to echo from upstairs. One by one, the guests turned to look. And it was then that she appeared at the top of the stairs. Majestic, steadfast, with the clip in her hair, shining under the lights of the tree. And at that moment, time seemed to stop. Because what would happen next, no one could predict. The steps creaked softly under Margaret's feet as she descended, but no one heard the actual sound. The entire room seemed to have been swallowed up by a strange kind of reverence. The conversation ceased, the laughter was swallowed, and even the cutlery that clinked on the plates stopped suddenly. All eyes turned to her, as if time had frozen and a cinematic scene was unfolding before her eyes. She emerged at the top of the stairs as a vision. The blue dress fell softly to her ankles, her bare shoulders reflected the candlelight, and in her hair, the golden barrette gleamed like an old scar finally assumed. But what drew the most attention was not the clothes. It was the look, steadfast, peaceful, and devastatingly present. For many of the guests, it was just a curious moment, an elegant woman coming down for supper. For others, especially those who knew the story more closely, there was immediate discomfort. But no one reacted like Emily. As soon as his eyes met the figure of the mother descending, an involuntary tremor ran through his body. Her face suddenly turned pale. His hands trembled, and the air seemed thin all around. The wine glass slipped from his fingers, falling to the carpet with a muffled thud, and blood-red splatters scattered across the light wool. She tried to get up, but before anyone could help her, fainted. The shock was immediate. A scream broke the silence. Someone got up in a hurry, and soon after confusion set in. People ran up to Emily, laid her on the couch, wet a cloth for her forehead, called a family doctor. Margaret, standing halfway up the stairs, watched everything with an expression that mixed astonishment and guilt. But something inside her, something she couldn't even explain, told her that it had to happen. It was as if her daughter's fainting was a symbolic rupture, a barrier break, a crack in the concrete from years of enforced silences. And now, no one else could ignore it. Richard was one of the first to approach Emily. He knelt beside her, tried to wake her, caressed her face with calculated delicacy. But there was tension in his gestures, a cold sweat on his forehead, a discreet tremor in the hands. Grace, attentive, noticed. She knew this man. I knew when he was out of control inside. And his reaction. He was not a worried father. It was a cornered man. As someone who fears that the fall of his daughter is the beginning of something much bigger, the fall of a mask that he has sustained for decades. And maybe it was. Because while Emily was still unconscious, Richard's gaze slowly climbed the stairs and found Margaret's. It was a long look, silent, but loaded with a past that no one there knew completely. Richard stood up slowly, walked toward the stairs, and stood on the fourth step, right in front of her. "Why did you do that?" he whispered. It was not a common question. It was an accusation, a warning, a fear disguised as reproach. Margaret, however, did not back down. She just looked at him with teary but firm eyes. And he replied with a simple, almost inaudible phrase, "Because I'm not going to hide anymore." And that was the fuse, the moment when Richard's world began to crumble inside. The guests were astonished. Some whispered, others just watched in absolute silence. The atmosphere, which minutes before had been pure partying, now looked like an invisible court. Everything hovered over the unsaid, over what was still hidden. But there was something inevitable in the air. A feeling that, after that fainting, after that silent confrontation, nothing would ever be the same again. Margaret, her body standing up and her heart racing, knew the truth was making its way. Not with shouting, but with presence, with courage, with that clip that was now more than an accessory. It was the spark of a whole hidden story. As the minutes dragged on, Emily began to come to her senses. She opened her eyes slowly, confused, frightened. He looked for his father's face, then his mother's. And when he saw Margaret there, intact, with the barrette still shining in her hair, tears began to flow from her eyes. They were no ordinary tears. They were the beginning of liberation, from memory, of understanding. And everyone noticed. The room fell silent again, as if that contained cry finally carried everything that needed to be said. But Margaret did not move. I knew that now was not the time to speak. It was time to wait, because the next word would have to come from Emily. Hers was the lost piece of history, and only her. He could open the door that still separated mother and daughter. The tension had reached its peak. And now, everyone was about to find out what that clip hid. The silence that followed Emily's fainting wasn't just the absence of sound. It was a heavy presence. A dense, suffocating void that filled the entire room like an invisible mist. The movement of the guests trying to help, the muffled sound of quick instructions, the hurried steps of someone bringing a glass of water. None of this broke the climate of suspension. It was as if time was hesitating to move on, as if everyone there was caught between what had just happened and what was about to be revealed. Margaret calmly descended the last few steps, each step carrying more than just the weight of her own body. She carried decades of silence, doubts, and unspoken wounds. Emily was awake, but still fragile. The friend who accompanied her on the couch held her hand carefully. Someone offered a blanket, others spoke quietly, as if the volume of their voices could make the situation worse. Richard remained by his daughter's side, trying to maintain control of the scene. He ran his hand through her hair, said generic phrases like, "It's okay, it was just a drop in pressure." But everyone there knew that it was not just that. Not by a long shot. Grace kept herself close, her arms crossed, her eyes attentive to every detail. She knew those two. He knew how to read what was not said. And inside her, something stirred. The certainty that the truth was very close to the surface. The guests began to exchange curious looks. Some whispered discreetly in the hallway. Others just pretended to be entertained with desserts, but kept their eyes on the room. The news of the fainting, the presence of her ex-husband, the tension between mother and daughter, all this spread like fire on thin paper. And as is common in events like this, questions began to bubble up in the minds of others. What was happening? What was behind that gesture? Would it be some kind of emotional crisis? An old conflict? A family revelation? The hypotheses were many, but everyone's eyes converged on the same point: the cleat. That tiny piece now felt like the center of an emotional hurricane. Margaret stood firm. He sat discreetly in one of the armchairs next to him, keeping his eyes on Emily, but without getting too close. He knew that, at that moment, his every gesture would be interpreted as a provocation or proof of guilt. And that's why he chose not to defend himself. Not with words. His presence was his answer. The choice to wear the clip was her silent statement. It was no longer about aesthetics or provocation. It was about truth. To assume who she was, even if it generated discomfort. Because, deep down, she knew the pain that had manifested itself in her daughter's body. It was just the echo of an even older pain. Richard, however, began to show his discomfort. His eyes jumped from one face to another, trying to predict reactions, to control the environment. The closeness to her daughter began to seem less natural, more strategic. He tried to fill the spaces with catchphrases, to calm those present with polite smiles. But no one else was buying it. Eyes began to drift away from him. And if before he was seen as the protective father, now there were doubts hovering over his figure. The mask was starting to crack, and he felt it. He felt that his narrative was in danger. And more than that, he felt that Margaret was finally ceasing to be the cornered woman he had built. Grace, in a moment of courage, broke the silence with a direct phrase. "What happened here today goes far beyond a fainting." The words hung in the air like thunder. No one answered, but everyone listened. Richard looked away. Margaret, on the other hand, looked at her with restrained gratitude. Her best friend had just opened the gap for something bigger to emerge. Emily, even though she was still confused, seemed to listen to everything with her eyes wide open now. And with each passing second, she herself seemed to begin to remember. As if the physical shock had unlocked emotional doors that had been sealed until then. Margaret felt it in her daughter's eyes. It was no longer fear. It was confusion. It was doubtful. And, curiously, it was also curiosity. Emily looked at her mother as if she were seeing something for the first time. As if she wanted to understand who that woman sitting there was, who had the courage to take a stand even in the face of chaos. It was as if, finally, the story she had heard all her life began to lose its strength, and her own conscience sought out the missing pieces of the puzzle. Margaret didn't know how long it would take, but I knew that this was the beginning. The point at which questions became inevitable. And while the atmosphere still oscillated between tension and expectation, the night advanced. The lights flickered silently. The music had stopped. The guests dispersed in small groups. But the heart of the house, it was still pulsing strongly. What would Emily say next? What else was hidden? And most of all, what did that fainting really awaken inside her? Emily was still sitting on the couch, wrapped in the blanket, her eyes fixed on somewhere between the present and the memories. The pale face, the trembling hands, and that lost look said more than any words. She no longer seemed confused, but connected with something internal that had long since fallen silent. Margaret remained silent, watching her daughter with the serenity of someone who had waited years for this moment. It was as if both of them shared an invisible bridge between past and present, and every second, a new piece of that bridge was rebuilt. The guests had already quietly withdrawn, realizing that they were facing a story too intimate to be shared as a group. Only those who belonged, those who were part of that family scar, remained. Emily finally broke the silence, in a low, almost childlike voice. I remembered something. Everyone in the room stopped, attentive. She looked at the floor, as if talking to herself. I must have been about 6 years old. You were beautiful, with that same hair, with that barrette. I remember thinking you were so beautiful. Her voice began to fail. But Dad, he yelled at you. He said you were trying to get attention. And I was scared. Margaret closed her eyes for a moment, as if those words finally validated everything she had felt for years. Grace shook her friend's hand. The truth was coming. Gradually, but it was. After that, Emily continued, he took me into the room and said that you couldn't be trusted when you wore this thing in your hair, that you transformed, that you were unstable. She put her hand to her mouth, as if trying to stop her own crying. He made me promise that if one day you appeared like this again, I should stay away, that it was a sign of danger. I've become afraid of you, and I didn't even know why. Those words fell on the room like a silent avalanche. The pain in Margaret's eyes was palpable, but she remained motionless. Not out of coldness, but out of reverence. That needed to come out. It needed to be said. He needed to be listened to. Richard, standing by the fireplace, lost his color. His eyes, once haughty, now averted. The posture stiffened. He tried to interrupt, stammering, Emily, that's not quite like that. But Grace was quick. No, now it's her turn. It was the first time in many years that someone had silenced him. And he felt it. He felt that he was losing control. Emily, in turn, looked up, and this time looked directly at her mother. I've judged you for so long, Mom. I was you. Cold. I thought you were unstable, weak, exaggerated. But now I'm starting to realize that maybe I've been deceived. For so long. Tears flowed freely. The emotion overflowed. It was like watching a dam break, not with screaming or chaos, but with a painful and necessary fluidity. Each memory that arose made room for others. Margaret was beginning to put the pieces together. Emily's silences, the disproportionate reactions, the inexplicable coldness. It all made sense now. That clip was more than an accessory. It was the marker of a distorted memory, carefully constructed by Richard to distance mother and daughter. A symbolic instrument of control. And the cruelest thing, all this had been done with false affection, with subtle manipulation, with a type of violence that leaves no mark on the body. But it devastates from within. Margaret took a deep breath, letting the emotion descend softly before she spoke. I always thought there was something wrong. Something I couldn't achieve in you. Something that blamed me speechlessly. Now I know that was it. You were made to fear me, to reject me. And I accepted. I accepted this because I loved you so much that I preferred silence to fighting. But now, I don't accept it anymore. The firmness in his voice was different. It wasn't anger. It was liberation. It was clarity. And Emily, on hearing this, began to cry as she had not cried in a long time. A cry of someone who is starting to see each other for the first time. Richard tried to resume the narrative. I just wanted to protect her. You've always been volatile, Margaret. It always had its moments, but no one believed it anymore. His words sounded empty, disconnected, desperate. Grace stared at him with a look that mixed repulsion and compassion. The only volatile thing here was your lie. Emily got up, with difficulty, and walked to her mother. The distance between them seemed like an eternity, but at the same time, each step seemed to heal years of estrangement. And when she got close, she touched the barrette to Margaret's hair with her fingertips. I'm not afraid of that anymore. It was the first gesture of reconciliation. At that moment, a new silence settled in the room. Not the silence of trauma, but that of revelation. That of the truth that has finally begun to emerge. There was still much to be said, but now the words had nowhere to go. Now there was space. Now there was listening. Because once the past begins to emerge, he doesn't go back to the bottom. And in that room warmed by candlelight and tears shed, everyone knew what would come next was no longer a mystery. It was confrontation. It was liberation. The mood in the room had completely changed. There were no more disguised noises, no diplomatic smiles, no excuses disguised as cordiality. The air was dense, carried by everything that had finally been said. Emily, still teary-eyed, remained by her mother's side. Margaret held his hand firmly, as if, after so many years, she could finally protect it as she had always wanted. The silence of that moment was no longer oppressive. It was solemn. And at the center of it all, standing like a statue, was Richard. His hands in his pockets, his chin stiff, and his gaze trying to hold firm. But anyone could see it. He was cornered. And he knew it. Grace was the first to break the tension. She got up from the couch and walked until she was face to face with Richard. "Have you anything to say?" he asked without raising his voice, but with a firmness that shook the ground. Richard took a deep breath, smiled forcefully, and tried his old tactic. Distort, relativize, confuse. "You are exaggerating. I would never do anything to take my daughter away from her mother. Margaret knows that I have always tried to keep the peace." Emily. She was sensitive, too small to understand certain things. I protected it." But his words had no effect. The audience had changed, and he no longer had control of the narrative. Emily stared at him with teary eyes. "You poisoned me, Dad. You planted fear in me as if you were teaching me to love. It made me believe that my mother was dangerous, that strong woman who hugged me on nights when you screamed was unstable. And I believed it, because I loved you, and because I was a child." Her voice was not one of anger, it was one of pain, and that hurt even more. Richard tried to interrupt her, raise his hand as he did in the old days to silence what he didn't want to hear. But it didn't work. Emily was no longer a child, and now she was standing. Margaret remained silent, but her entire body was alert. Every word of the daughter was like a medicine, and also like a wound being washed away. She looked at Richard with eyes that no longer carried fear or blind anger. They carried compassion, perhaps, but above all, justice. When he finally decided to speak, his voice came out firm and low. "You've always been afraid of me, Richard. Not because I was unstable, but because I saw you as you really were. Because I knew that the educated man on the street was not the same man inside the house. And you hated it. I hated knowing that I didn't really fear you. So he had to make our daughter fear me." The words echoed in the room like hammers. Grace nodded silently. She knew. I always knew. But to hear it from Margaret's mouth, It was something else. Richard shook his head nervously. You're delusional. It's distorting everything. It has always been dramatic, theatrical. He always made a point of being the victim, but his voice no longer held. She was shaky, angry, defensive. The image of control he had cultivated so much was beginning to crumble. And everyone saw it. Everyone listened. It was impossible to deny what was in front of everyone's eyes. A daughter destroyed, an ex-wife injured, a story badly told, and a cornered man. Emily stepped forward. You took me away from the person who loved me the most. He did it carefully, with sweetness even, as if telling a bedtime story. But it was not a fairy tale. It was a plot of fear. And the worst, it's just that I didn't even notice. The tears now flowed freely, but there was strength in every word. I'm not stuck in that anymore. I'm no longer your puppet. And I need you to hear it from my mouth. What you did was cruel. And if you still have some respect for me, he will listen quietly. It was the first time Richard had lowered his eyes. The emotional empire he built in silence. There was noise. Margaret got up and walked over to Emily. The two hugged each other tightly, as if meeting after a long and silent war. The crying was now mutual. It was delivery. It was healing starting to happen. And Richard was left out. For the first time, he was not the center. He was not heard. He was not revered. And there, in that room lit by Christmas lights, surrounded by distorted memories that he himself helped to build, I was alone. Grace, teary-eyed, summed it all up in a whispered sentence. The truth may take time, but it always comes. And she had arrived. For the pain, for the confrontation, for the courage to open old wounds, but also by the decision to cure them. And as Richard slowly walked away, feeling the weight of what he had lost, mother and daughter, hand in hand, faced the future. They knew that there would still be a lot to rebuild. But now, rebuilt together. And that was the beginning of a new story. Emily was still holding her mother's hand when a new silence fell over the room. But now it was a different silence, full of attention, listening, surrender. It was as if everyone present knew, deep in their souls, that what would come next would change everything. The young woman took a deep breath, trying to organize thoughts that had always seemed confusing inside her. But at that moment, something had fallen into place. An old piece, a hidden memory. And when he opened his mouth to speak, his voice came out low, but firm. I have to tell everything. For me. For you, Mom. And because I don't want to carry that anymore. Margaret's face was serene, but her teary eyes revealed what her heart felt. That sentence was enough. It was the kind of phrase a mother expects to hear all her life, not for the revelation itself, but for the freedom it offers. Emily sat on the couch while everyone in the room, including Richard, stood still, as if about to hear a sacred testimony. The truth, she began, is that for years I have heard a story told by someone I trusted blindly. Dad used to say that you had crises, that it was unpredictable, that one Christmas, you almost caused an accident. Margaret frowned, surprised. Accident, he whispered. Emily nodded. He said it was in 1999. That you put that clip on, went downstairs, and started yelling at him. That he was out of his mind. That left me locked in the room while I threw objects around the house. That the police were almost called, but that he managed to calm you down before. She breathed hard, the words cut off. I believed. Every word. Because he was my father. Because he said everything calmly, as if lamenting, as if protecting. And I was moving away from you, thinking you were unbalanced. that I needed to be careful with you." Margaret put her hand to her mouth, swallowing her emotion. She didn't remember anything like it, and that hurt, because if it were true, she would have a conscience. He would have regretted it. He would have asked for forgiveness. But nothing, absolutely nothing, made sense. "Emily, that never happened. Never." Her mother's voice was full of shock and tenderness. "I remember that Christmas. You played with the new doll you got from Aunt Eleanor. I dressed you in a red sweater and combed your hair with the teddy bear barrette. Then I put mine. I remember, because that was the last Christmas we laughed together before the silence began." Emily put her hand to her head, as if her mother's memory had unlocked something inside her. "The red sweater," murmured. "The doll. I remember that too." His eyes widened. "But why did I never connect these memories? Why did I keep only his story?" She began to cry, because it was easier to believe in those who spoke sweetly than in the silence of those who suffered in silence. "Mother, I was made to fear you, and I've been cruel to you for so long." Margaret approached and hugged her. "You were manipulated, and the worst, it was manipulated with love. And that's the hardest kind of prison to see." Richard tried to intervene. "You were only 6 years old. It was impressionable. I just wanted to protect you." But his voice no longer had strength. It was like a weak wind trying to put out a fire that was now growing fueled by truth. Emily stood up, facing her father with a look he had never seen. "You took away my chance to love my mother completely. It gave me a distorted mother, painted with her traumas. And today, I see who she really is. And I see who you've always been." The firmness in her voice was cutting. Richard took a step back. For the first time, it seemed smaller than the past itself. Margaret ran her hand through her daughter's hair, as she did when she was a child. "The important thing is that now you know, and that now, we can start over." The two hugged each other tightly, as if they were gluing the cracks left by so many years of emotional distance. The warmth of that embrace was truer than any burning fireplace. It was reparation. It was reconnection. And, more than anything, it was liberation. The story now had a name, a body, a plot. And finally, the secret that kept everything shrouded in mist had been revealed. What would come next was still uncertain. But one thing was clear. The bridge between mother and daughter was rebuilt. And what had been told as absolute truth for years, now it was just a distant echo of a broken manipulation. Because when the light of truth enters, it dispels any shadow, even the most ancient. The atmosphere in the room was one of redemptive tension. The kind of tension that doesn't overwhelm, but heralds healing. The silence that took over the environment now was not one of fear, nor of restraint, but of reverence in the face of something sacred, the truth about to be born. Margaret held her daughter's hand tenderly, while Emily searched with her eyes in the depths of her own memory. If what he told me wasn't true, so what really happened that night? The question hung in the air like a loose rope, and for the first time, the answer came not in rehearsed words, but in flashes of the soul. And with each fragment that emerged, the puzzle was assembled before everyone. It was Margaret who first remembered. That year was difficult. You were sick the week of Christmas. He had a high fever, remember? I stayed awake for 3 nights, taking your temperature, bathing you with warm water, lying next to you. And on the night of the party, I didn't want to go, but he insisted. He said it would be no big deal, that you could stay asleep in the room, and that I just needed to do my part of the wife. I accepted, and I got ready. I put on that dress. I put the clip on. Her eyes filled with tears. And that's when everything started to go wrong. Emily squinted, as if pulling something that was buried. I remember being in bed, sweating. I remember the noise downstairs. You fought. Margaret nodded. Yes. He started teasing me even before the guests arrived. He said that I looked vulgar, that I only wore the clip when I wanted to attract attention. I tried to ignore it, but he wouldn't stop. When the guests arrived, he changed his tune. He started to act as if nothing had happened. But inside, I was already in pieces. Then, when you started crying, I ran upstairs. You had a very high fever. I wanted to take you to the hospital, but he didn't let him. Her voice trembled. He said I was being dramatic, that you were exaggerating, that it was just a tantrum. And when I insisted, he locked himself with you in the room. He left me outside. You screamed. I knocked on the door. And then, when you stopped crying, he opened it and said that it was already resolved. That I should go take care of the guests and not make a fuss. And I went. I cried in the bathroom, washed my face, and I put on a smile. The pain of the memory tore at Margaret's soul. And that was the night he rewrote. Distorted. He turned it into a nightmare in his head. He said I was the unstable one. But he was the one who scared you. He was the one who used my absence to shape you. Emily now wept silently. I remember the door. I remember feeling trapped. I remember him saying that Mom was very angry, and that it was better not to trust her when she wore that shine in her hair. She touched the clip with trembling fingers. I was only 6 years old, and this was recorded as a warning. Every time I saw you trying to get closer, something kept me away. I thought it was instinct, but it was fear taught. She looked at her mother. You never did any of that. He used his absence to write a monster in my head. Margaret hugged her daughter as if protecting her from one last storm. And now we tear up this history. Together. Richard, leaning against the wall, said nothing. His silence was cowardly, but revealing. There were no more arguments. There was nowhere to hide. All the pieces were on display. And at that moment, even he knew he had lost. Not just the control of the narrative, but what he feared most. He had lost his authority over memory. And when a woman recovers her own history, there is no more room for the author of the lie. Grace, who had listened to it all in silence, came over and said in a low voice, "He has not defeated you, Margaret. He just slowed you down. But now, it's over." Emily, still hugging her mother, raised her face. I spent years feeling guilty about something that never existed, for an accident that was never real, for a cry that was never his. And now that I see, everything hurts, but it's a good kind of pain, because now I know where the lie ends and you begin. Margaret smiled, even with tears in her eyes. I waited a long time for this, but it was worth every second, because now I've got you back. And at that moment, there was no villain left. There was no more noise. There were two souls who met again in the truth. And the truth, even if late, always heals. The beret, which for years was a symbol of pain and fear, was now just an ornament. One detail, a reminder that false memories can be rewritten, that distorted histories can be undone, and that every woman who has been silenced can, and should, take back her own voice. In that room lit by Christmas lights, there were no more lies, only love, reconnection, and the certainty that the real accident of that night was emotional. But now, finally, it has stalled. When the truth is spoken out loud, something changes in the environment. The air is cleaner. The walls, which once muffled the scream, now echo each word as liberation. In that room decorated for Christmas, where polite smiles and silent hypocrisy once reigned, there was now a naked, raw, living truth. And like all profound truth, it not only liberates, it confronts. Richard was standing, but his body felt heavier, as if the ground no longer supported him. For the first time, he didn't know what to do. There was no argument, there was no diplomatic solution, there was no control. Everything he built collapsed there. Emily pulled away from her mother and slowly turned toward her father. The tear that flowed was no longer of confusion, but of decision. She approached, slowly, with a look that mixed pain and firmness. "You destroyed my confidence, not only in my mother, but in myself. For years, I thought I was crazy, that I couldn't understand why I walked away from those who loved me. And now I know. I was taught to reject sincere love. This is unforgivable." Her voice was like a soft blade. She didn't have to scream to cut. It was enough to be heard. Richard tried to justify himself, almost in a whisper. I just wanted to protect you." But the phrase had no more force. He did not even convince himself. Grace stepped forward. "You protected your version of the facts. It protected his pride. But it destroyed a daughter. And he tried to erase a woman. And now, Richard, you no longer have the right to speak." The silence that followed was definitive. It was as if the sentence had been given. He, who had always positioned himself as a savior, was now seen as the real cause of the wound. And the pain of unmasking was visible even in his hunched shoulders. One of Emily's uncles, who was present, crossed his arms. "You have always been the darling of the family. I always knew what to say. But now, I see that everything was a facade." Other guests, previously silent, murmured in agreement. It was as if everyone was waking up from a collective trance. The aura of untouchability that enveloped Richard faded, and with it, the ties that kept him within that family nucleus. Margaret remained silent, but her presence was majestic. There was no need for revenge. Justice was being done by the truth. That's it. It was stronger than any retaliation. Richard walked to the door, aimlessly. He paused for a moment, as if waiting to be called back. But no one said anything. Neither did Margaret. Neither did Emily. Neither is Grace. Silence was answer enough. He had been expelled, not by force, but for truth. And there is no more powerful expulsion than this. He left, and the door closed behind him as a full stop. Outside, the snow continued to fall, indifferent to the human drama unfolding there. But inside that house, history had changed forever. Emily slumped on the couch, exhausted, not physically, but emotionally. "I don't know how to go on after this," he murmured. Margaret sat down next to her. "You start with what's left, and it builds what has never been allowed before." The two hugged. There was no need for words anymore. Trust, which was once a broken bridge, was now a foundation under reconstruction. And each brick of this new relationship would be made of truth, of listening, of presence, everything that Richard never knew how to offer. That night would not end with Christmas carols or joyful toasts, but it would end with something much more powerful: rebirth. Because sometimes, the greatest supper happens in silence, around broken hearts that have decided to love each other anyway. And in that embrace between mother and daughter, there was hope, there was strength, there was a new beginning. The house was silent. Not the silence of trauma, nor that of tension, but that of peace after war. The kind of silence that only happens when all the truths have been told, all the wounds exposed, all the ghosts faced. Margaret and Emily were still on the couch, still hugging, as if that contact was the most important anchor of the night. The room was lit only by the lights of the Christmas tree and the candles that burned slowly, as if witnessing, in respect, that sacred moment. For the first time in many years, there was no distance between mother and daughter. Emily leaned her head against her mother's shoulder. "Do you still love me after all I've done to you?" The question did not come from doubt, but from guilt. Her voice trembled like a child's apologizing for a mistake she didn't even know she had made. Margaret stroked her daughter's hair gently and replied without hesitation, "I never stopped, not for a second. Loving you is what kept me alive all these years. Even when you didn't tell me, even when you ignored me, I loved you in silence. And I waited every day for the time to have you back." Emily cried with her face hidden in her mother's chest. It was the cry of guilt dissolved, of repentance accepted, of the inner child finally being heard. "Forgive me for believing in him, for having chosen the easy way, for judging you for something you never did." Margaret squeezed the hug and said tenderly, "You were just a girl. You believed what seemed safe. That's it. It's not guilt. This is survival. I don't want you to feel guilty. I want you to be free." And at that moment, something came loose in Emily's chest, as if an invisible chain, which had bound her for years, had been broken. The two remained hugging for long minutes, as if time had stopped only to allow that bond to be restored. They didn't have to say much. Presence was enough. Reconnection didn't require more words, just permanence. Emily looked around the house, and everything seemed different. The same lights, the same paintings, the same furniture. But now, everything seemed more alive. Because now there was truth. There was real history. There was room for a new version of life, and, especially, for a new version of who she herself was. Grace watched from afar, tears in her eyes. I knew that this was a silent miracle, a reunion between two souls who had been separated by the lie, but united by the courage to face it. Margaret, with her firm sweetness, and Emily, with her vulnerability exposed, were building something they never had, a clean relationship. True, profound, and that was more precious than any Christmas present. It was the kind of repair that no time would erase. Emily took her mother's hand and said, "Can we try again? Can you start from here?" Margaret smiled with moist eyes. "We don't need to try. We have already started. When you held my hand, it all started again." The barrette was still stuck in Margaret's hair, but now, it no longer caused pain. It was a symbol of overcoming, of identity, of courage. And Emily looked at her as if she finally understood what it represented. It wasn't about the object. It was about the woman who chose to wear it. The woman she now really knew. Later, the two sat at the table, with only Grace, drinking tea and eating the cookies that had been forgotten during the riot. They laughed softly at old memories, as if life had been waiting for years to breathe lightly. Emily told stories of adolescence that Margaret did not know, and Margaret revealed maternal secrets that she had never had the opportunity to share. It was as if they were filling in the blank spaces left by the years. And each word exchanged was a new brick on a bridge that no longer had cracks. Christmas that year had no hearty supper, no loud music, and no dozens of guests. But there was something that no party could offer: reconnection, healing, love restored. And as the snow fell gently outside, inside, hearts also snowed, washing, purifying, starting again. Because true love can be interrupted, but never destroyed. The next day's sun dawned shy over Portland, tinting the snow with soft golden hues. The town still seemed to be sleeping under the white blanket of winter, but inside Margaret Collins's house, something had already awakened, and it wouldn't go back to sleep. The truth, finally revealed, had not made a noise, had not exploded in screams or destruction. She had walked in through the front door, dressed in courage, and had sat down at the table. And with it came freedom. A strange freedom at first, like someone who walks for the first time after surgery. Still in pain, but with direction. Margaret woke up early, as usual, but that dawn was different. He walked through the house in silence, looking at every detail with another eye. Everything looked the same, but everything was new. The small Emily picture frame on the shelf. The mug with the letter M that he used every day. The armchair where Grace fell asleep after the intense night. Everything carried a new presence. Peace. A peace that did not come from the absence of problems, but from the presence of truth. She knew that there would still be a lot to rebuild. But now, he would rebuild with real bricks. No disguises, no guilt, no manipulation. Emily appeared soon after, still with the blanket on her shoulders. He sat down at the table and smiled. Not that forced smile of family gatherings, but a new smile. Light, genuine, almost childlike. "I slept through the night," she said, surprised. "I don't think that's happened in years." Margaret just nodded, holding her daughter's hand over the embroidered towel. Maybe because, for the first time, his soul didn't have to watch. The two laughed softly, accomplices. There was a new intimacy between them, as if they had survived a fire and were now sitting around the fireplace in the rubble, warming up with what was left and what he would start over. Over coffee, they talked about what would come next. Emily wanted to spend more time with her mother, review old letters, to hear stories you've never heard, relearn who Margaret really was. And Margaret, with a new twinkle in her eye, suggested they write a notebook together, a reconstruction diary, where they would put true memories and new memories. "Let's create our own narrative, daughter. One that no one else writes for us." Emily smiled with moist eyes. This time, just us. Outside, the city was beginning to awaken. The distant sound of the bells of a nearby church heralded Christmas. But inside, the celebration was silent and sacred. There was no exchange of gifts that day, but there was an exchange of truths, requests for forgiveness, acceptance. And that was more valuable than any wrapping with a golden bow. Because there are gifts that cannot be bought, nor asked for. They arise when someone has the courage to love in the place where they have been hurt the most. Grace woke up to find the two of them in the kitchen. She hugged them both tightly. "I think this was the truest Christmas I've ever experienced." And it was. Not because of the supper, nor because of the tree, but because three women had broken a cycle. A cycle of silence, of fear, of falsehood. And together, they had made a new pact, never to be silent again. Never again accept love by half. Never again allow the manipulated past to be higher than the real present. Richard was not seen that day. He didn't even need to. His role was over. Not for revenge, but for consequence. When the truth takes its place, everything that is a lie loses its air. And now, the air of that house was different. Lightweight. Alive. Ready to be filled with new conversations, smells of cake, spontaneous laughter, and full hugs. Margaret knew this. Emily too. And together, they toasted with a cup of tea, to healing, to courage, and the right to start over, even after everything. Because, in the end, the truth does not destroy. She reveals. It heals. It rebuilds. And the greatest gift anyone can receive is the chance to finally live without fear of their own history. Margaret and Emily were doing just that. The fireplace crackled softly, casting warm shadows on the walls of the room. The Christmas tree, still lit, was the only active light in the room. The blinkers seemed to breathe with the rhythm of the house, as if they knew that night, they were not just decorating a corner. were witnessing a new beginning. Margaret and Emily were sitting on the floor, side by side, with a blanket covering their legs and an open keepsake box between them. It was Margaret's old trunk, the one where she kept letters, photographs, small objects that told her story. And among them was the barrette. Carefully, Emily picked her up. He observed the glow of the piece in the soft light, and, for the first time, he felt no fear, nor guilt, no doubt. He felt respect for everything she represented, for all that it cost, for all that he healed. She handed it to her mother gently. Margaret smiled and stood up. He walked to the fireplace, where he had previously placed the most beautiful ornaments, and there, on the varnished wood, he rested the clip, as if to say, without words, "This is no longer a secret. It is a milestone, a memory rescued." The piece shone, now no longer as a symbol of pain, but as a witness to the transformation. Outside, snow was still falling. The world went on as if nothing had happened, but inside that house, everything was new. Emily stood up and hugged her mother from behind. The two were silent, looking at the fire, at the barrette, at everything that had been achieved that night. Not with shouting, but with listening, with delivery, with courage. It was the kind of victory that doesn't make headlines, but it changes destinies. The reconnection between the two did not erase the past, but it gave it new meaning. And that was more than enough. Grace appeared at the door of the room with 3 mugs of hot tea. He handed one to each and sat in the armchair, watching the two. If someone had told me that today it would end like this, I wouldn't have believed it. Margaret smiled. Neither do I. But sometimes, Christmas doesn't give us what we want. He gives us what we need. Emily nodded. And sometimes, what we need most, it's going home, even if this house is a person. The phrase hung in the air like poetry, and at that moment, everyone there knew this was their new home. Not the walls, but the bonds rebuilt. The clock was almost midnight. Outside, church bells rang in celebration. It was officially Christmas. A new day, a new cycle, a new life. Margaret got up and turned off the lights in the room, leaving only the glow of the fireplace and the tree. She looked at Emily with a tender gaze, full of pride and gratitude. "Merry Christmas, daughter." Emily smiled. "Happy truth, Mom." The two embraced in the dark, enveloped by the warmth of the fire and the soft light that danced on the walls. The narrator returns, in a serene, almost whispered voice. "The truth hurts, but it also liberates. And when we decided to tell our story as it really was, we have earned the right to rewrite it as it can be. May this Christmas be more than a date. Let it be the beginning of a new version of you. A fearless version. A whole version. Not every wound screams. Some live in silence inside us, disguised as a memory, as usual, or guilt. And sometimes, what seems like a simple accessory, a loose word, or a vague memory. It is, in fact, the loose thread of a poorly told story. Margaret spent years being judged for something she never did. Emily spent years loving in fear. And Richard, he spent years sustaining an empire of lies built on smiles, calculated affection, and silence. But Christmas that year didn't just bring snow. It brought courage. The courage of a mother who decided to dig up the past, even though she knew it could hurt. The courage of a daughter who looked inside and realized that she carried memories that were not hers. And the courage of both, to rebuild, from scratch, a love that should never have been interrupted. If you've made it this far, maybe this story has touched something inside you. Maybe you're also carrying memories that don't belong to you. Maybe you've been taught to be afraid of someone. Or it was someone who was pushed away by a false narrative. Whatever your role, No, there is still time to start over. The truth, when it comes, can hurt, but it also heals. And sometimes, the greatest gift you can give someone, or yourself, is the right to be heard with truth. If this story moved you, leave your comment. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want to keep listening to stories that touch, heal, and transform, subscribe to the channel. Because here, every story has a truth waiting to be released. And maybe the next one is yours.